We are back to church 2021. This is kind of our back to school theme. As you can tell, I'm dressed as if I were going back to school the first day of my 7th grade year in 1989. I like went completely out, and you can't maybe tell from there, but I even cuffed the jeans. The jeans are tight rolled like I used to wear in the. Oh, look out! Look out! I am throwing it way back. We had this. Pastor Roy and I were working. Pastor Roy was a very much the driving force behind this idea of the Back to Church Sunday, and with our back to school theme, we were looking at different things, and I thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to dress like I would dress in 1989. However, when I was in 7th grade in 1989, I didn't have a denim jacket. I didn't have the tight rolled jeans. Actually, this is what I looked like the first day of school in 1989. This is what a cool kid would have worn then. That's what this kid wore back then. I feel every time I see that picture, I just want to go up to that kid and put my arm around him and say, buddy, it gets better. It really does. It really does. It starts with a haircut. Why did my mother not let me get my haircut like that? However, that was just kind of how I was back then, but I wanted to get into the full thing because we're going to talk about defining moments today. We're going to talk about some defining moments in the life of one of Jesus' disciples. But before I get to that, there are other things that we just talking about defining moments that we experience in life. And a lot of defining moments for people, and me being one of them primarily, since I have the microphone. Defining moments for me, a lot of them happened around the first day of school. The first day of school was always a big deal for me. My mom would go and get new clothes, and I would go to school wearing new clothes. I didn't have a fanny pack today. If I thought about it, should have probably gotten my fanny pack, because I remember going to school, showing up the first day of 8th grade, which was in 1990 for me. I showed up wearing a fanny pack, and it was just, I was trying to be cool, but I wanted to look my best on the first day of school, and I had these different experiences, these different moments when I was in school. Actually, by the time I was in 9th grade, I had changed schools 8 times at 7 different schools. And you're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, I'm going to tell you, because there's one story specifically that's relevant. I went to kindergarten and 1st grade at one school, 2nd and 3rd grade at a different school. And then I went back to that first school for 4th grade because of just how my parents moved, and it was in the same area, just a different school district. So I had a reunion with some of my old school friends from kindergarten and 1st grade in 4th grade. So it was kind of a reunion, but it was also kind of something new. This was an opportunity to go back to this school that I had been before and to be somebody different. I had gone to a different school for 2nd and 3rd grade, so I was coming back a more mature guy than these guys remember, than my friends remember. And I remember that my class, when I went into my 4th grade class, I looked over, and there was Courtney Buchanan. Courtney Buchanan was my kindergarten and 1st grade crush, and I was so excited that she got to be in my 4th grade class too, and I was like, yeah. And so I got swagger now, man. I'm older. I got swagger. I've been here, and it come time to go to lunch, and I had to use the restroom on the way to lunch, and I told the teacher, and she's like, oh, Rodney, you've been at this school before. You know where the lunchroom is. Go on ahead and you can catch up with us. And I'm like, yeah, I know where the lunchroom is. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and I'm going to meet you guys at lunch. So I go to the bathroom, and I come out, and the students have already made their way to the lunchroom. And I just, get my little swagger walk, because I'm going down the hallways of my old school. Like, I know where I'm going. And I turn left, and it doesn't look quite like I remember it looking, and I don't remember which door is the lunchroom. And so I start walking, and I'm like, uh-oh, okay. And then I hear some loud noise on the other side of a door, and I'm like, that's the lunchroom, that's the one. And I open the door, and I go right in, and it's almost like you could hear the record scratch. As every head in the room turns and looks, it was not the lunchroom. It was some other classroom. And it was a classroom, and I was just bebopping in there like it was something. Well, I was mortified. Here I was with this big old head, and I was like, yeah, this is my school. I know where I'm going. I walk into the wrong classroom. I was like moonwalking out of that classroom as smooth as I could. I closed the door. Wasn't ever going to happen again. What did I do? I went to the one place where I knew I could go. I went back to my classroom and closed the door and got in my classroom and just sat there. I missed lunch the first day. So here I am with a swagger, acting like I was going to have this awesome first day of school back at this school, and the teacher comes back and she's like, "You never made it to lunch." And I'm like, "I don't want to talk about it." And so I just sat there, no lunch on the first day of school. Some of you have great memories of going back to school. Some of the defining moments in your childhood you can think of if you were raised in church might surround something that involved coming back to church. Maybe it was a youth trip or a hangout. Our youth group would go on skiing trips, and we would have lock-ins, and we would do various things. We would go on ministry tours where we would go and do music and skits and dramas and things at different churches, and those are good memories from my childhood. Maybe your memory or a defining moment that involves church is your wedding day. You can remember the doors opening in the back of the church and your bride walking down the aisle and the beauty that surrounded that wedding. Or maybe you remember your dad or someone special walking you down the aisle to meet your husband at the altar. And just a wedding is a beautiful day, and it's something that you remember, a defining moment. Or mission trips, serving other people, going out and really working and being a servant of God, serving other people. Unfortunately, others have negative memories associated with going back to church. It drags up pain of people talking about you or lying about you or doing something that hurts you. Maybe it's the memory of a loved one that used to bring you to church, and there's some pain associated with that. And as you're here today, and maybe you're watching online, the thought of church sometimes can bring a variety of emotions. Maybe it's something of excitement. Maybe it's grief. It might be love. Maybe it's anxiety. Maybe you feel joy, pain, sunshine, and rain. Maybe you feel confusion. Maybe you all of these different emotions that are brought up, but you're here for a reason today. Maybe someone invited you, or you got one of our mailers, or you found us online, or you're here because you're dedicated to God and you know that you need to be in church on Sunday because you want to be surrounded by other people, other worshipers. Or you're watching us online today and you're wishing that you could be here for whatever reason. But the fact that you're here, the fact that you are with us right now is no accident. And today can be a defining moment in your life. And when you think back over some of those defining moments, I have some that stand out for me. I talked about my first day of fourth grade there. But there's some other defining moments that stand out, like my high school graduation. I didn't get to walk in my high school graduation because I spent that day in jail and doing something that I shouldn't have done. And that's a story for another time. But if you look me up on Grady Judd's website, I'm not there, so my record was expunged. But I talked about weddings being a defining moment. My wedding, March 23rd, 2002. March 29th. I know, it's 329. March 29th, 2002. Beautiful wedding on the side of a lake at sunset. And one of the things that it was a beautiful defining moment in our wedding was the sun was setting and these ducks flew in and landed at the edge of the lake during our wedding ceremony. And it was such a beautiful time. There was actually a kid who grew up in this church, Kevin Crawford, was in my wedding, and he was standing down on the end of the groomsmen, and the ducks came off of the lake, and they began mating right in the middle of my wedding ceremony. I don't know if that was a blessing to show that I would have 5 children, but whatever, these ducks were mating right in the middle of my wedding ceremony. And the little junior groom or the ring bearer, one of the 2 little kids that were in our wedding, looked over and was like, "They're fighting. Those ducks are fighting." And Kevin, who was standing on the end, just kind of grabbed the kid and turned him around. He said, "No, that's okay, buddy. Look over here." But talking about my 5 children. So each one of my 5 children's birth, I vividly remember. And so those are 5 different defining moments in my life. I didn't get to walk at my high school graduation, so I made a point to go and walk at each of my college graduations, both levels of college that I finished. I went and walked because those were defining moments for me. And as I said, today can be a defining moment for you. And in every defining moment, there's an opportunity for God to do something amazing in your life. I'll say it again. In every defining moment, you have an opportunity for God to do something amazing in your life. I recently read a book about defining moments, and I encourage you, if you have an opportunity, the author is a pastor in Louisville. His name is Kyle Idleman, and it's a great book. It's called Not a Fan. In fact, it's one of his older books. But it talks about these defining moments in people's lives, and one of the stories that we're going to talk about with Peter today, it comes from there, and it's using one of Jesus' own disciples as an example of defining moments. And it's hard to find a more defining moment than this one here with Peter. So when we look back at the life of Peter, we see that Peter, at the very beginning of his narrative in the Gospels, Peter is a fisherman, and he's out doing his job that he was doing fishing. He was out there with his brother. It was a family thing that they did. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a rabbi or somebody who was considered one of the upper people in society. He was a fisherman, and he was good at what he did because it was able to sustain him, but they were having a difficult time, and Jesus tells them to go back out and cast their nets on the other side. So what ends up happening is he does this. He goes out, this uneducated fisherman. We know that there's some things that are talked about, that Peter had kind of a foul mouth. So you have this cursing fisherman who's out there, and Jesus tells him to do something, and he does. And so then Peter experiences in this moment the worst night of fishing when he caught nothing. Now he's experiencing the greatest night of fishing, the greatest day of fishing, because his nets are full to the overflowing. So much so that the nets begin to break. There's so many fish. So now Jesus just blessed this moment with Peter, and he gives him a charge. He says, "Follow after me, and I will make you fishers of men." At a time when he had just had his best day of work, his most profitable day, his day when he got the most fish, which would have provided for his family, it could have sold that fish and done a really, really good job with it. Then Jesus says, "I want you to walk away from all of that, and I want you to come after me." Now that Greek word there, come after or follow after, is the word opiso. It's called opiso, and that means after, which means what Jesus was saying was, I want you to follow me. And it's not just step where I step, turn where I turn. It's saying, I want you to come do what I do. Jesus told Peter on that day, I want you to follow after me. Come after me. Come and do what I do, and I will make you fishers of men. So Peter, from that point on, had a number of moments that were really defining moments. It kind of stood out. Peter was one of the disciples that stood out because he was mentioned time and time again because of these moments. Peter was one of 3 disciples that got to witness Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. What happened? Jesus took these disciples with him up a mountain one night, and he was transfigured. He was lifted up and glorified, and to one side was Moses, to the other side was Elijah, and this was this beautiful moment of Jesus in his glory, and Peter was so excited about it that he was like, hey, we need to never ever leave here. Let's build some monuments right here. Let's build an altar to Jesus and an altar to Elijah and an altar to Moses. Let's do that right here. And then another moment that was just amazing that Peter got to experience that most of the others didn't was he got to hear the voice of God in that moment. The voice of God came out when Peter was trying to turn that moment into something else, and he said, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Peter had this awesome opportunity. He saw something that most of the others didn't get to see, and he heard something that most of the others didn't get to hear. Later on, it would be a time when Peter was in the boat, and there was a storm, and Jesus was in the bottom of the boat asleep. He was just chilling, man. You know, you ever had a waterbed you're talking about back in the 80s? I had a waterbed, and I would lay down in that thing and get it rocking like this, and it would just rock me to sleep slowly. And so that's Jesus, man. He's in the bottom of the boat. He's asleep. The storm is raging, and the disciples are freaking out. They wake him up. They're like, "Jesus, what do we do?" And he just kind of is like, "Why, you guys have so little faith." He says, "Peace, be still," and the storm went away, and the water became calm. Peter was there for that. Peter was also there the day that Jesus fed 5,000. He took a sack lunch, blessed it and multiplied it, and they began to hand it out, and there were 5,000 men that were there that day that were fed. So there's all of these things that Peter got to experience. And one of the cool things about it is all those things that I told you about happened within a 3-year window. Peter was a man who lived a long life, and there were many things even after the time of Jesus that we can read about in the book of Acts and other places that we know about Peter. There were some significant moments then too. But all of this that I talked about happened within this 3-year window. But there's another defining moment that took place in Peter's life today, and I want you to see your own situation and your own defining moment through this. In Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 22. Immediately after this, and this here is the feeding of the 5,000. So I led you to the narrative of the feeding of the multitude. This is the next story that comes right after it. Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake where he sent the people home, or while he sent the people home. So here Jesus is sending them out. He tells them they'll catch up later. They get to take the shortcut. Get in the boat, scoot across the lake. I'll meet up with you later. He doesn't say when. He doesn't say how. He's just like, y'all go ahead. I'll catch up with you. And so, verse 23, after sending them home, he went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Take courage, I am here." And here we have Peter's defining moment in this situation. And here's an opportunity for Peter to stand out, to do something amazing. Verse 28, then Peter called to him, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on water." "Yes, come," Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on water toward Jesus. He appears to them in the storm. In the middle of the storm, he spoke to the disciples and said, "Don't be afraid." These 12 guys are watching this scene play out. They're all scared, thinking that it's a ghost. But then Jesus speaks, and the word of Jesus calmed them, because that's what he did. You see, the last time they were in a boat and they were on a storm, Jesus spoke to the storm, and he said, "Peace, be still." The storm calmed. The winds calmed. The waves calmed. This time, Jesus speaks to the disciples, and he tells them not to fear. He tells them to have peace. So in that moment, sometimes Jesus is going to speak to your storm. Sometimes Jesus is going to speak to you. Sometimes you're going to have peace in the middle of the storm while the storm is still raging, but sometimes he'll calm the storm. But right at this point, he tells the disciples and speaks to them to calm them. So Peter has this defining moment to get out of the boat. Staying in the boat was not going to be enough for him. Staying in the boat and being like the other disciples was not going to cut it. You see, Peter was one, as I said a minute ago, he stood out. He's one that we read a lot about. There were other disciples in the boat along with him. But how many of you know a story? And some of you may, but just throw up a hand. How many of you know a whole lot of stories about the disciple named Thaddeus? No? Nobody got a Thaddeus story? You know why? Thaddeus stayed in the boat. Peter decided he didn't want to just be like the other disciples. He wanted to go and do other things. Remember, Jesus said, "Come after me." He said, "Come and do the things that I do." And that's what's happening. Peter sees that, and he has this bold move. It's a bold move for him to be able to ask Jesus, "Well, if it's really you, then invite me out onto the water." That's showing a measure of faith here. That's showing that Peter wants more than just to believe that it's Jesus. It's one thing to believe that that's Jesus and that he is who he says he is, and he did what he said he would do. That's great. Jesus is who he said he is. He did what he said he would do, and that is believing in him, and that's wonderful. Believing in Jesus leads to salvation, but it's another level to follow him. It's another level to pursue and to chase after Jesus. You see, you can believe in Jesus without following him, but you can't follow him without believing. So it starts with belief. We have to believe, but we have to move beyond just the level of belief. We need to move into an action phase. We can be passive and we can believe and we can be like Thaddeus and stay in the boat. Or we can be like Peter and we can chase after Jesus. We can pursue him. And that's what Peter decides to do. So in your life, you have a choice between whether you're going to believe and stay in the boat or whether you're going to pursue him. And people want to be close to Jesus, but they get so that they get the benefits of a relationship with Jesus without the requirement that it comes with following and pursuing him. Well, we want to get, the little joke is that it's your fire insurance. Okay, well, I've prayed the prayer. I've asked Jesus to come into my heart and forgive me. That's it. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to go anywhere else. I'm good with just being a believer. And being a believer is, Acts 16:31 says, believe on the Lord Jesus, you will be saved. So being saved means we're rescued out of our sins so we can inherit eternal life. That is a great benefit of being a believer. But we don't need to stop there. We need to go further and pursue him, because pursuing Jesus leads to defining moment after defining moment after defining moment. All of these peaks that we get to have and experience with him come from pursuing him. Again, only 3 of the disciples got invited to go to the mountaintop of Transfiguration and see Jesus in his glory and hear the voice of God. Why? Because these are 3 that were pursuing Jesus more than just being a follower. They were not just disciples. They were in the inner circle. They were even further because of their pursuit of his calling. So Peter has this moment in his life where he needs to define his relationship with Jesus. And that's where we come. In any relationship, you have to come to a point where you define that relationship, where you put parameters around it, where you define what that is, what is going on here. You can have, maybe it's a romantic relationship, and you'll come to a point where you need to decide, are we just friends? Are we talking? Are we dating? Are we, let me throw it back for some of y'all, are we going steady? Are you going to wear my class ring and around your neck? And am I going to wear your Letterman's jacket or whatever? You got to define a relationship. When you get to a certain point, there are parameters about it. And there was one that anytime I talk about defining a relationship, it brings me to a moment when I was in high school, and there was this girl that and this is our define the relationship moment. I didn't have a whole lot of girlfriends. In fact, this girl never really became my girlfriend, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But her and I were mutually interested in one another, so we went out. We went out with her family. It wasn't like her and I went on a date alone. Her family had an event, so we went to this event, and I hung out with them, and there was an opportunity as the evening was getting close to being over where, we shared a kiss. We shared a moment and shared a kiss. Now, it's G-rated. That's as far as it ever went. Even Disney movies have some kissing in it, but nothing bad, just we shared a kiss. And we went to her home, and again, we're hanging out with her family, and I'm, just kind of grazing around the house, and I look over, and there's a bunch of pictures, and I like to look at people's family pictures, and I especially like to see pictures of people when they were little, because, you saw the picture of me when I was little, and it makes me feel better to see that everybody had an awkward stage. So I'm looking, and all of a sudden, I come across this picture, and I get this gut feeling. Hey, why do you have a picture of my granny? Yeah, some of you are already there. And she said, that's Aunt Veda. No, I just became the most stereotypical redneck country bumpkin person, Polk County in the world. I expect that in Alabama. No, I'm sorry if you're from Alabama. I'm sorry. I meant to say West Virginia. Oh, no. No, not West Virginia. I meant to say Florida State fans. Oh. I kissed my cousin. So let me tell you, we didn't need to define the relationship. At that moment, the relationship was defined. At that moment, it was, you're my cousin, we'll never speak of this again. And you know what? We never did. Years would go by. I would be watching the news in Georgia. Lindsay and I were married at this time. We were living in Georgia, and a news came on about something that happened in Tampa. And she was a woman by this point, was involved in this situation, and they flash her picture on the screen and her name, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's my cousin that I kissed. And Lindsay's like, hold up, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, that was a repressed memory that I hadn't thought of in years. And who knew that someday I would get up and tell about it in church and on the internet. Hey, Melissa, if you're out there and you happen to be watching. Whew. So we come to a point in all relationships where you need to define the relationship. You need to know what each person, their role is in this relationship, because if it's one-sided, it's not going to last. Defining the relationship brings you to the point where you know. When I finally would meet Lindsay, I knew within the first week of meeting her that I was going to marry her. I knew that that was the woman I was going to spend the rest of my life with. I knew that there was no other woman that I wanted to pursue. There are moments when you have to make those commitments and you no longer are in a casual relationship. You're exclusive with that person and you're not going to be with anyone else. And what you're doing is you're making a commitment that you are just as invested in that relationship as they are. And we understand that when it comes to romance, but what happens is it's time for us to define our relationship with Jesus. It's time for us to go into a place where we are with Him, that we love Him as much as He loves us. And that's a tall order, because He laid down His life for His love for you. He loved you so much that He willingly took on the sin of humanity so that you could be reconciled to the Father. And Peter is at this moment, this defining moment in his relationship with Jesus. Am I just going to stay in the boat and be a believer like the rest of them, or am I going to pursue Him? What does that look like for you? How are you going to pursue Jesus? Because He's calling you. He's telling you, come after me. He's telling you, come do what I'm doing. It's not going to be enough to stay in the boat with your fire insurance and you'll be safe from hell. Swing your leg over the rail and come and follow me, and I'll show you amazing things that you can only dream of. So that's what Peter did. He made the decision to pursue. And of course, we know verse 30, when he saw the strong wind and waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Now, Peter has faith. Peter had enough faith to get out of the boat and walk on water. But then his fear starts to set in. Wait, people aren't supposed to be able to do this. People aren't supposed to be able to walk on water. Have you ever found yourself having done something and then you realize after you're already in it, you've already committed, you're already up to what's going on, and then you realize, I have made a huge mistake. You have gone out on the limb and I maybe not should have done this. When I went to college, there's a river that runs through Tennessee called the Hiwassee River. And there's a section of the river just north of Cleveland that is in Charleston, and it's called the Charleston Cliffs. And these cliffs are rocky cliffs that are on the edge of this river. And what happened my first year up there in Tennessee, we went and my friends took me and we went jumping off this cliff into the river. And here's the picture of it. That's what it looks like. But this wasn't the first time I did it. I've done it dozens and dozens of times over the past 25 years. In fact, this picture is from a time when I took one of my youth groups up there, and I had members of my youth group that did it. And that other guy, I'm the one with his arms out like this and in the gray shirt, and the other guy is the kid from my youth group that also made the leap with me. But as many times as I've done it, and I've done it and done it and done it, and it's thrilling, and it's so much fun. Every time. And even right now, if I were to go to Tennessee and stand on the edge of that cliff tomorrow, I would stand on the edge of that cliff and go, I don't think I can do it. Why did I do this? Why did I climb all the way up here? I can't climb down the face of the rock. The only way down is for me to jump. And so now I'm like, I'm here, this is bad, and I do it. And you know what? It ends up being a fun time, and I'll climb back up and do it again. But sometimes we get ourselves in a position where it takes a leap. It takes something like that, swinging the leg over the boat. And when we get out there and we're like, I'm not sure if this is what's going to happen. Peter was so full of adrenaline, and he was so full of his desire to be with Jesus that he did something irrational. Even asking if he could do it was not something that nobody else thought of. But Peter thought of it. So he had faith enough to get himself into that situation. And he's walking on water, and fear creeps in, and he sinks. And I don't know why I used to think this, but as a kid, I used to picture him sinking like he was in quicksand. Like it was a slow, oh no, I'm sinking, help me, Jesus. That's not how the physics work of water. He was on the water 1 second, his faith was in question, bloop. He's down, and he's bobbing, oh! But he got enough breath in his lungs to cry out, save me, Lord. And in his biggest moment of trouble, he cries out to the one who's not sinking. Verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Then the disciples worshiped him. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. Let's look at this. Jesus got onto him for not having faith. He didn't get on to the disciples that were still in the boat that didn't even have enough faith to get out of the boat. He got on to Peter. But what was the deal with Peter's faith? You of little faith. Jesus wasn't sinking. So when Peter looked to Jesus, he didn't lose faith in Jesus because Jesus was still standing on top of the water. So he still believes in Jesus. But he's no longer, at that point, he's no longer pursuing him. He's sinking. Remember, he was an uneducated fisherman, but Jesus called him to pursue him and to do what he did. And at the moment that Peter stood out in faith and then stopped pursuing Jesus as he began to sink, Peter lost faith in his own ability to do what Jesus said he could do. Peter lost faith in his own ability to follow after Jesus. Jesus told him, come after me and I will make you a fisher of men. You can do what I can do. But he lost faith that he could do what Jesus said he could do. I want you to understand something this morning. You can do something great. You can do something amazing. And whether you realize it or not, those of you who are in Christ, you have already experienced something supernatural. You're like, well, I like Jesus and all, but I'm not sure about all these miracle things. Well, if you have asked Jesus to come into your heart and to change you, and you have confessed that you believe that he died on the cross and that he rose again on the third day and that he ascended to heaven and is seated next to the Father and is preparing a place for you, all of those things are things that can't happen in the natural. All of those are supernatural. So you have already made the decision that I believe in the supernatural, and because of that, that means that if you believe that, you believe what Jesus said. And Jesus said that in fact, in John 14, Peter was there in John 14, when Jesus told them that you will be able to do greater works, that you will see greater works than even I did. So Jesus is telling them, I've done all of this to prepare you for what's next so that you can, all these things that you've seen me do over these past 3 years, you're going to be able to do them. Not only this, but you're going to be able to do greater things. You can be different from everyone else. You can be just as set apart as someone, as Peter was, and be in someone who is destined to do something amazing if you pursue Jesus. Not just believe. Not just, well, okay, but you pursue him. Moving beyond just belief. Moving to a place that's mentioned, like what's mentioned in the book of Joshua. Joshua was at a point where he had to tell the people of Israel, choose this day who you will serve. We are at a choose this day moment. I want to make it 1 week without hearing that another loved one has died. But I don't know what tomorrow holds. I want to make it 1 week without hearing that some other friend of mine has COVID. Some other person connected to this church is sick or on a ventilator. I want to go just a few days without hearing the tragedy of that. But we live in a world that is full of sin because of the original sin. And because of that, we are at a moment of a choose this day who you will serve. This is your defining moment today. Verse 33, then the disciples worshiped him. You really are the Son of God. What happens when you pursue Jesus instead of just sticking back at believing? What happens when you realize that you can do incredible things, the things that Jesus said that you can do? Now understand something. I am not talking about elevating ourselves and putting ourselves anywhere near God. That is the wrong direction. John the Baptist talked about, I must decrease, he must increase. That's the way. The downward descent into greatness is through humility. It's through realizing that the only way that strength happens is through our weakness. Because in my weakness, he shows himself strong. I have to have the faith to swing my leg over the boat and to get out and pursue Jesus across something that is physically impossible. But when I do so, I have to realize it's not about me, it's about him and about doing what he said that I could do, not for my glory, but for his. It all begins and ends with Jesus. You know what? Peter couldn't have even had the idea to get out and walk on water if Jesus hadn't been out there already. Will you stand? As I begin to pray, if you need to make a decision this morning, choosing who you will serve, this altar is open. You can come down and you can follow after Jesus in the same way that he gave Peter that call in Matthew chapter 4 when he said, follow after me and I'll make you fishers of men. Come do what I do. Come follow the example that I'll live, is what Jesus was telling them. And he was empowering them to do even greater works than him. But you have to follow him. You have to pursue him. It goes beyond just making a decision. You may have other needs. We'll pray for whatever needs you have. But as we enter into this time this morning, I want us to make that decision. I want you to choose this day what it will look like for you.